We are often told that old photographs are a window into the past, an impartial record of life as it once was. However, a closer look at images of the world's largest cities from the 19th century reveals something strange and unsettling. Majestic facades, wide avenues, and complex architecture stand before us in complete silence, like ghost towns frozen in time. They are almost entirely empty of people. The most common explanation for this phenomenon is the technical limitation of early cameras. It's said that due to long exposure times, only stationary objects remained in the frame, while the moving figures of people and carriages simply blurred into shadows or vanished completely. This explanation seems logical and convenient, allowing us to avoid asking further questions. But this theory falls apart as soon as we look at other photographs from the same era. There are images, taken at the very same time, showing the streets of European and American cities bustling with life. They capture not only crowds of people, but even horses, which are not known for standing still for dozens of minutes. Furthermore, by the 1880s, technology was already advanced enough to capture motion. The Lumiere brothers were showcasing their first films, where the exposure was short enough to record people walking and the hustle of daily life. The argument that one had to freeze for half an hour for a photograph no longer holds up. This means the technical ability to capture a living city existed. But it's not just about the people. These cities show no signs of life itself. The rooftops of magnificent buildings have chimneys, but not a single one is emitting smoke, even though heating in that era depended on fire. The streets are empty, despite all trade being conducted from stalls, shops, and carts. There isn't the slightest hint of everyday routine. No laundry drying on lines, no trace of artisans at work, no scattered hay for horses. Absolutely nothing. Occasionally, a photograph of a huge metropolis might capture one or two individuals, but their presence only highlights the overwhelming emptiness. It's reminiscent of modern photos of Pripyat, where tourists occasionally visit to take pictures against the backdrop of abandoned buildings. The grandeur of the architecture starkly contrasts with the complete absence of life. This brings us to a crucial and disturbing question. If the official version doesn't stand up to scrutiny, and the cities were indeed empty, what happened to their inhabitants? Where did all the people go, and why does history remain silent about this strange and ominous void? The mystery of the empty cities is just the first thread in a web of secrets we are about to unravel. The emptiness captured in these old photographs is more than just a lack of crowds. It's a deep, pervasive silence that permeates every stone and every avenue. As we look closer at the details, it becomes clear that the issue isn't the photography technique, but the complete absence of a functioning society. Hundreds of buildings have chimneys, but the sky above them is crystal clear. In an age when coal and wood were the only sources of heat, cities should have been shrouded in smoke, especially during colder months. Here, there is no smoke at all, as if every hearth in every home is cold. The streets, which should have been arteries of commerce and social life, appear sterile. There are no carts delivering goods, no street vendors calling out prices, not even the random litter that is an inevitable part of any living city. Public spaces, squares, and parks designed for gatherings and leisure are desolate and silent. There are no laundresses hanging clothes to dry, a universal sign of daily life found in any culture. No children playing on the cobblestones, no craftsmen working outside their shops. The cities don't just look quiet, they look uninhabited, like giant, elaborate stage sets before the actors have arrived. Even a comparison to modern abandoned places like Pripyat only deepens the mystery. A city deserted after a catastrophe retains traces of a life suddenly cut short. Personal belongings left behind, furniture in apartments, frozen amusement park rides. It tells the story of its own demise. Moreover, even the most isolated exclusion zones today are visited by explorers, tourists, and adventurers. Their presence leaves new traces. The ancient cities in these photographs, however, don't look like they were abandoned in a hurry. They look as if they were meticulously prepared, cleaned, but never actually settled. The rare figures that sometimes appear in the frame only emphasize the scale of this emptiness. A single person in a vast square, or before a grand cathedral, looks less like a resident and more like a lone explorer who has stumbled into a forgotten kingdom. But the most striking and telling witness to this strange anomaly is nature itself. Surrounding the monumental, seemingly ancient buildings that look as if they have stood for centuries, we see strikingly young vegetation. The trees planted along the avenues and in the parks are thin, fragile saplings, appearing no more than a few years old. Their trunks are barely as thick as an adult's arm. This creates an incredible dissonance. The architecture speaks of a long, rich history, while the surrounding landscape suggests a very recent beginning. It's as if someone erected these stone masterpieces in the middle of a nearly barren land and then started planting parks from scratch. If we look at these same places today, we see mighty, sprawling trees and dense forests that took a century and a half to grow. This means that at the time the photographs were taken, all this vegetation was indeed in its infancy. A logical question arises. What happened to the nature that must have surrounded these cities before? And why did a civilization capable of creating such complex structures live surrounded by such young and sparse flora? All this points to a kind of global reset, an event after which life, both human and plant, began anew, either on the ruins or, more accurately, within the ready-made sets of something great. But the emptiness is just the tip of the iceberg. When we stop looking at what's missing and start looking at what's there, the buildings themselves, the riddles only multiply. Who could have built all this magnificence? And why does it seem that the creators of these masterpieces simply vanished? When we turn our attention from the ringing emptiness of these cities to the buildings themselves, the mystery only deepens. Official history presents us with a simple and clear picture. Our ancestors, armed with primitive tools, sweat, and perseverance, erected these masterpieces by hand. We are told of thousands of laborers who, using hammers, chisels, levers, and draft animals, slowly, stone by stone, created the splendor we see today. This image is filled with heroic sentiment, but it collapses when faced with the reality of the engineering and technological challenges. Let's consider the most basic task: stone processing. Looking at the perfectly fitted monolithic blocks, the intricate carvings, and the incredible precision of the facade details, it's hard to believe this was all the result of manual labor. Officially, the first power tool appeared only in 1895, and it was a cumbersome drill weighing nearly 8 kilograms that required several people to operate. Mass production of powerful and affordable tools that could significantly ease construction only began in the mid-20th century. How then could people with not even basic mechanization not just build, but create works of art from giant stone monoliths? Could we today, even with all our modern technology, replicate some of these structures using only the methods attributed to our ancestors? The answer is obvious. But if the problem of tools seems abstract, there are concrete examples that defy the official narrative. Take, for instance, the Erie Canal in North America. According to historical records, it was built between 1817 and 1825. At that time, the United States was a young country, which, according to the same historians, had almost no professional engineers. Nevertheless, in a remarkably short period, just 8 years, a waterway 585 kilometers long, 12 meters wide, and 4 meters deep was created. This was not just a simple ditch. The builders, mostly Irish immigrants with oxen and shovels, had to cut through dense forests and construct complex aqueducts and locks to overcome elevation changes. Moreover, They had to carve through the Niagara Escarpment, a 24-meter-high wall of solid limestone. They could only blast the rock with black powder, as dynamite had not yet been invented. A simple calculation shows that to complete the project on time, they had to build an average of 1.6 kilometers of canal every 8 days. Without weekends, without breaks, day and night. Such a construction pace would be record-breaking even today, with powerful excavators, laser levels, and modern explosives. To believe this was accomplished by unskilled laborers with primitive tools is to believe in a miracle. However, the most inexplicable legacy of the past is the so-called star forts scattered across the globe. Official history calls them defensive structures, created in the age of gunpowder to protect against cannon fire. Their complex geometric shape was supposedly designed to minimize dead zones during an attack. But no historian asks how, and more importantly, why these forts were built with such incredible mathematical and geometric precision. Their perfect, symmetrical shapes, consisting of dozens of angles and bastions, can only be fully appreciated from a bird's-eye view. Our ancestors, we are told, had no satellites, no airplanes, not even accurate topographical maps to design and oversee the construction of such massive and flawlessly symmetrical objects. How could they create such complex geometry on a grand scale without the ability to see their creation from above? So, we see grand, empty cities built with unknown technologies. But the most astounding secret is not hidden in photographs or archives. It lies right beneath our feet. What if I told you that the cities we see are just a small fraction of what has been hidden from us? The most astounding secret of the past is not hidden in the heavens or in ancient texts, but literally right beneath our feet, under the asphalt and cobblestones of modern streets. In every major city in the world, from old European capitals to relatively young American metropolises, the same strange phenomenon can be observed. Magnificent buildings in the classical style have windows and doors that go deep into the ground. We see entire floors, half or fully buried beneath the modern sidewalk level. The entrances to these structures are often located unnaturally high, and below them, in the earth, are rows of basement windows that were, in fact, once the windows of a proper ground floor. Official science offers several explanations for this phenomenon, but none of them hold up to scrutiny. The most popular version is the cultural layer theory. We're told that over centuries, cities gradually grow upwards. Old buildings are demolished, new ones are built on their remains. Garbage and dirt accumulate, and over time, the ground level rises. However, this theory can explain a gradual increase of a few centimeters per century, but it can't explain 2 to 3 meters of soil evenly covering entire city districts in a relatively short historical period. Geologists find no evidence of such rapid and widespread soil accumulation. Another explanation suggests this is simply an architectural feature, that these were just basement levels, always intended to be underground. But this version falls apart as soon as we take a closer look at these so-called basements. They are equipped with large, often ornately decorated windows designed for daylight, and sometimes even full-sized formal doors. No sane architect would design luxurious entrances and windows for a floor that was planned to be buried from the start. It defies all logic and common sense. The truth begins to emerge when we turn back to the photographs of the 19th century, but look at them from a different angle. The people in these pictures are often not building, but literally digging out pre-existing buildings. The streets are not construction sites, but giant pits filled with mountains of excavated earth, clay, and mud. The roads are uneven and torn up, and against this backdrop stand magnificent but partially buried structures. One gets the impression that people arrived in already built but buried cities and began the process of cleaning them up, clearing away enormous masses of soil. This phenomenon is global in nature. From St. Petersburg to Washington, from Paris to Buenos Aires, the picture is the same. What could have caused such a widespread catastrophe? Modern science gives us a clue. During powerful earthquakes, as seen in Japan or Christchurch, New Zealand, a phenomenon called soil liquefaction can occur. Due to intense shaking, water-saturated soil loses its strength and behaves like a liquid. In such conditions, buildings can tip over, collapse, or, most importantly for us, partially sink into the softened ground, which then solidifies again, locking them permanently in their new position. However, earthquakes are local events. What we observe all over the world points to a process with a similar mechanism but on a planetary scale. A cataclysm, which we might call a mudflood, covered the entire civilization. It didn't destroy the buildings completely, but it buried their ground floors under a thick layer of mud, clay, and sand. The architecture either sank into liquefied soil or was covered by giant landslides and mudflows. A global catastrophe that buried cities in mud explains why they were empty and why they had to be dug out. But this raises the most crucial and chilling question. If the previous inhabitants disappeared, who repopulated these cities? And more importantly, how? The answer to this question is the most tragic and hidden part of our history. As we try to understand who repopulated the excavated and empty cities, we encounter another global anomaly of the 19th century, an unprecedented and inexplicable explosion in the number of orphans. This phenomenon was so pervasive that it left a deep mark on the culture of the time. Classic literature is filled with characters like Oliver Twist, Jane Eyre, and Tom Sawyer, children without parents, making their own way in a cruel world. But what if these stories were not just a product of the writer's imagination, but a reflection of a horrifying reality in which millions of children truly found themselves without a past and without a family? Official history explains this by pointing to harsh social norms. We are told that a woman who had a child out of wedlock became an outcast, and her child had no rights. To escape shame and poverty, mothers were forced to give their children to orphanages. However, the scale of this phenomenon simply does not align with such a simple explanation. The statistics are staggering and suggest this was not just a social problem, but a demographic catastrophe. In Great Britain alone, over 400 orphanages were founded in the 19th century. In the early 20th century, Italy reported 32,000 abandoned children per year. The orphanages of Milan and Naples had accepted a total of 374,000 infants by 1860. By the 1880s, Moscow was receiving up to 18,000 infants annually, most of whom were then sent to be raised in remote villages. These were not isolated tragedies, but a vast, centralized system for collecting and distributing children. The most vivid example of this system was the so-called orphan trains in the United States. From 1854 to 1929, hundreds of thousands of children from overcrowded orphanages on the East Coast were put on trains and sent west, where they were picked up by farmers and settlers. Officially, this was presented as a charitable program giving children a chance at a new life. But in reality, it was a massive operation to populate territories with a human resource devoid of roots and memory of a past. And this wasn't just happening in America. Similar programs operated worldwide. Children from Europe were sent to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, where they were often used as cheap labor. Behind this facade of charity, even more disturbing practices were hidden. Newspapers of the time were filled with advertisements for adoption or childcare services, which many researchers believe were a cover for so-called baby farming. For a fee, a baby farmer would take an infant from a desperate mother. The ads often contained coded phrases like "no questions asked," which was a signal that no one would investigate what happened next. It was often a cold, business-like transaction that took place at a train station or another public place. The mother handed over the money and the child. understanding she would never see them again, and the grim outcome was a foregone conclusion. But perhaps the strangest and most sinister mystery of this era was the infant incubators exhibited at amusement parks and world fairs. Picture this. Next to the carousels and fun houses, there was a pavilion where, behind glass, premature babies lay in special machines. The public paid money to look at them, as if they were a curious exhibit. The official story portrays this as the heroic work of Dr. Martin Cooney, who supposedly saved infants' lives while raising money for expensive equipment. But this version leaves the most important questions unanswered. Where did this incredible number of premature babies come from? By some estimates, as many as 80,000 infants passed through these attractions. Where were their parents? And why did a society, where childbirth was a common event, view infants in incubators as a form of entertainment worth paying for? It's as if people had never seen such a thing before, or didn't have children of their own. Empty, excavated cities. And millions of children with no past, being centrally collected and distributed across the globe. When we put these two elements together, a picture emerges of a grand deception that has shaped our modern world. When all the scattered and seemingly unrelated facts are pieced together, a picture emerges that is so vast and shocking, it can completely overturn our understanding of the past. The empty cities, the impossible technologies, the buried floors, and the army of orphans. These are not separate historical curiosities. They are pieces of a single, giant puzzle, and now we are ready to assemble it, to see the full picture of the greatest deception in human history. At the heart of it all lies a legacy that is not our own. The structures we see across the world, from canals that cut through continents to star forts with their perfect geometry, are evidence of a single global civilization that existed in the past. This civilization possessed technologies and knowledge that we today cannot fully comprehend, let alone replicate. Their architecture was not merely functional, it was an embodiment of harmony, mathematical precision, and a deep understanding of the laws of nature. They built to last, creating an infrastructure on a planetary scale. These were not our primitive ancestors with picks and shovels, but a highly advanced culture whose level of development may have even surpassed our own. Then, disaster struck. A global cataclysm, the traces of which we see in the meters-thick layers of clay and soil blanketed the entire planet. This was not an explosion or an asteroid impact that would have wiped everything off the face of the Earth. It was something different. Perhaps a gigantic wave of mud and water that swept across the continents. The civilization wasn't destroyed, but buried. The majority of its population vanished, and their magnificent cities were covered and partially submerged in softened soil. Life on the planet came to a standstill. This is the state we see in the 19th century photographs. Perfectly preserved, yet dead, empty, and buried ghost towns. Into this empty world came a new power, a new elite. We don't know if they were survivors of the cataclysm or if they arrived from somewhere else. But one thing is clear, they were not the builders of this world. They were its inheritors. They found a ready-made, albeit damaged, infrastructure on a planetary scale. Their first and foremost task was not creation, but a titanic cleanup effort. The people we see in photographs with shovels are not digging foundations for new buildings. They are digging out old ones, freeing them from their muddy prison. The entire 19th century was marked by this global cleanup day. But excavating the cities was only half the battle. They needed to be populated. How could this be done if most of the planet's indigenous population had disappeared? And, more importantly, how could it be ensured that the new inhabitants would have no memory of the previous world and its creators? The answer was as brilliant as it was cruel. They needed clean human material. People with no past, with no parents who could tell them the truth. The ideal candidates for this role were children. Thus, a global program was launched which we know as the orphan phenomenon of the 19th century. Millions of children, either left over from the cataclysm or perhaps artificially created as part of some program, were gathered from all over the world. They were given new names, new life stories were invented for them, and any memory of their origins was erased. All the rhetoric about illegitimate births and social shame was merely a propaganda smokescreen to hide the true purpose: the creation of a new humanity from scratch. These children were distributed like seeds across the world on orphan trains and ships, populating the cleaned cities and continents. They became the first inhabitants of the New World. Now the picture becomes clear. The people we see in old photographs are not the builders. They are the first settlers who inherited a world without having the slightest idea of who built it or for what purpose. They unknowingly participated in repurposing ancient structures, turning them into what we know today. Our entire official history, beginning around the 19th century, is an elaborate legend designed to fill the memory vacuum and explain the origin of the world we were given. The Industrial Revolution, the great construction projects, the heroic pioneers, all of it is a beautiful facade hiding the fact that we simply found everything ready-made. The outcome of this great reset is this: we are the direct descendants of that lost generation. We live in other people's houses and walk on the streets of cities whose true history has been hidden from us. Our civilization did not develop in a linear, gradual way. It was rebooted just a few hundred years ago on the ruins of a previous, much more advanced one, the memory of which was intentionally erased. Realizing this truth is like waking from a dream, one in which a familiar and understandable world suddenly turns out to be a complex and carefully crafted illusion. Now, when you look at the old buildings in your city, you no longer see just architectural monuments, but silent witnesses to a great secret. You see the windows sinking below the ground and understand that beneath your feet lies a hidden world, a whole history concealed from you. The school textbooks that tell of humanity's gradual and logical development now seem like a collection of fairy tales, written to lull our consciousness and prevent us from asking uncomfortable questions. The world will never be the same again, because you have learned to see the cracks in its facade. This is not just an abstract theory about the distant past. This knowledge directly affects each of us, changing our very sense of self and our place in history. If we are the descendants of that lost generation, raised in orphanages and settled in empty cities, then who are we really? What is our true heritage? We live in inherited stage sets, use the remnants of someone else's technology, and accept as our own a history that was written for us by the victors of a war we know nothing about, or the survivors of a catastrophe we have forgotten. The very foundation of our worldview, built on a lie about our origins, proves to be incredibly fragile, and once a single stone is removed, the entire structure begins to crumble. This inevitably leads us to the ultimate, dizzying question. If they lied to us about our recent past so brazenly and on such a massive scale, what else are they lying about? If the history of the 19th and 20th centuries was fabricated, can we trust what we are told about more ancient times, the Middle Ages, antiquity, the origin of humanity? Can we trust a science that builds its theories on this false historical foundation? This one exposed lie unleashes a chain reaction of doubt that extends to all spheres of our knowledge. And here, a second, equally important problem arises. How can you know where you are going if you don't know where you are or where you came from? We have been deprived of our starting point, our true past. A people stripped of their history becomes a crowd, easy to manipulate, and direct towards goals that benefit those who hide the truth. Without knowing the lessons of the past, we are doomed to repeat its mistakes. Without understanding whose legacy we are living on, we cannot fully appreciate it, let alone create something of comparable greatness. We are wandering in the dark, mistaking the dim light of an artificial lamp for the sun. This awakening is not a destination, but the beginning of a journey. It is a truly precious gift, but it also carries a great responsibility. The responsibility to be observant, to look not only at what we are shown, but also at what is being hidden. To ask questions, even if they seem absurd or inappropriate. To stop blindly trusting authorities, whether they are Nobel laureates or official historians. To look for inconsistencies, to analyze, and to draw our own conclusions. All the answers have always been right in front of us, but we were programmed from childhood not to see them. Now is the time to learn to see again. The story of the buried cities and the relocation of orphans is just one, albeit crucial, clue in the global case of a substituted reality. It is the first, most obvious layer of deceit that we have managed to uncover. But beneath it lie others, even deeper and more fundamental. These are all key links pointing to some global cataclysm and the subsequent reset. But the real story is just beginning. Ahead of us lies the exploration of how this lie connects to the very nature of our world, to the true structure of the firmament, the sun, and the moon. Just turn on your notifications and wait. The stage is set, and we are moving directly into the heart of this mystery.